Welcome to the in-between years, where life doesn't come with a manual, but we've got the mic here to talk about aging parents, long-term care, and the conversations that no one wants to have. I'm your host, Holly Westerveld. What would you do if, while you were caring for an aging parent, the one person helping you was suddenly facing a serious health battle of their own, and in a matter of months, everything you were sharing became yours to carry alone? Our guest today is Kristen Martin Eldridge, who is the National Accounts Director with Reframe Financial, where she's worked for the past 3.5 years. But Kristen is an insurance professional that has more than 20 years' experience in the individual, multi-life, and group long-term care insurance and voluntary benefits industry. Prior to Reframe, Kristen also has experience at Transamerica and John Hancock, so she just has a wealth of knowledge to share with us today, in addition to her personal story. Kristen's story is a testament to working through challenges, to getting things done, and to doing the hard things. When listening to this, you're going to wonder how she does it all. Today, we're going to talk about Kristen's mom, Rosemarie. So, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
You bet. So, if you don't mind, would you start just by telling us about your mom? Tell us about Rosemarie, what her story is, and how you came to be in this caregiving journey.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about my mom, Rosemarie. She is 83 years young. I'm really lucky. I'm a very lucky girl to have her as my mom. She's just a love. She's a love bug. She's very protective. She's one of the most selfless people I've ever known. I know people say that about their loved ones and their parents, but I really have to say, I don't think she has a jealous bone in her body. And if you needed the last dollar she had, she would give it to you. She's just that kind, loving type mother, individual and human. You know, she's gone through a lot of care journeys herself with her mother, and she's right now in a facility. And she's, the only thing that really is hard to watch is that she sees people, she's 83 and this started, a few years back. She's 83, she sees people her age still going on cruises and trips. And that's just not her reality, unfortunately, anymore. She's dealing with that new reality right now. So she worked really hard and was really proud to own her own home. And she was a single mom, raising myself and my sister. My parents divorced when I was about 3. And my grandmother moved in, her mom, when I was about 4 or 5. And she was helping with that, take care of us. So she was like another parent to me growing up. We grew up Italian, so my grandmother's off the bone, my nonni from Montemolini, Italy. She was also loving and strict, Italian strict, but as I mentioned, another caregiving story with her took place in my 20s, where she broke her hip and was in a care facility for 10 years. So I grew up with a lot of great, independent, strong, amazing women. So my mom's care story started about 12 years ago. I was on my way home from work. And I talked to my mom every day. It's the Italian way. We talk, even in college, I had to call her and my mom and my grandmother every day. Are you okay? So always checking on each other. But I went to call her on the way home from work one night and she didn't pick up. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And it was about 9 o'clock at night. Called my sister to be like, hey, have you heard from mom? And found out her and her family had not heard from my mom probably since yesterday. So I wasn't feeling right about it, and I called, I was like, all right, I kept calling, and I was like, I'm just going to head over there. So about 11 o'clock at night, I ended up heading over to her house, and I got there, and the house was completely dark. Car in the driveway, which was not her. She always loved TV. She's a night owl. So kind of like your worst nightmare. I was like, oh, God, what is happening? What has happened? So I ended up having to gain access to her home. It was all locked. She even had, the storm doors locked. And get into the house, and she was in the dark, and she was in distress. So, and so rushed to the hospital, and all the fears and nerves that come and follow with that, and comes to find out she had a stroke. So this independent, person who would get in her car and just go, this was a major life event. And it took about 2 months to determine what was the cause. We were getting conflicting information from some doctors, and just didn't originally agree with their assessments. So we kept just advocating and fought. And luckily, her primary care physician referred us to an outstanding vascular surgeon who's out in Boston, Massachusetts. And he was able to pinpoint what happened, first of all, because we were told, we don't know what she had a stroke. It was a long journey to kind of even get there, and fighting for her and advocating for her while she was in a rehab facility at the time for a couple of months. But he was able to pinpoint, what happened, and he immediately told us, she needs a pretty extensive and unique open heart surgery.
Wow.
So everything stopped right there, right? And was, wasn't the norm. So, we put her in his hands, and he saved her life, which was amazing. Fortunately, after the massive surgery, she did pretty well, had to go to rehab again, a long rehab journey. She was back, but just different. Yeah. And in the years that kind of followed that, she definitely started to need help. My sister was like, she's going to start needing help now with bills, so I'm going to have to start working on them. And we also started to realize she needed home health kit aids and shower assistance, like housekeeping, shopping. At first, she was not jazzed to have people in her home. You always like,
That's very common, yeah.
I love to live in my home independently, and so it took a little bit of nudging and, saying, and I know she would have loved my sister and I to take care of her. But unfortunately, we were working, and it just was like, professionals need to do this, people who are trained. And that's kind of where we came from. And we wanted to make sure she was safe. And so, we went that route. Fortunately, there was a really good healthcare agency in the area. She first started out about 2 days a week for a couple hours, and then it moved to about 3 days a week with different types of aides coming in those days. I'm not going to lie, there were some hiccups over the years.
I imagine.
In demands, dealing with folks not showing up or able to come. Some aides didn't work out, personality-wise and things like that. So you have to navigate and always be present in that process. Because my mom's the type of person that's like, I love everybody. And then you'd come to find out, like, oh, things were not done in a certain way. See, you have to address that, right? So, yeah, so that's when you got to be, a kind of cohesive unit during that whole process. And communication, I always say, is very key when dealing with that with loved ones in a situation when that happens. Things just like, okay, so you have the aides, but you still have to make sure, like I said, you're advocating for mom. Does the aide have the shopping list that week, right? Do they have the money on the table to go to the shopping? This is kind of like Venmo is just kind of coming to light, and they haven't used cash and things like that. Then we realized that she needed pill management help. And so that we decided, that we were going to take on and help because it just felt right. So we took turns every morning and evening to set up her pills. She lived 30 minutes from me. Luckily, my sister, where she worked, she was in the same town. But if she were to travel from home to do it, it was 30 minutes. So pretty close, but still an hour round trip.
Yeah. Commitment, yeah.
And we had a small immediate family. So it was myself, my sister, my brother-in-law, and my niece taking turns during that phase. And as the years went on, we tried to start the hard conversations of like, do you think this is the best thing for you to be home alone? My mom was fiercely independent again, proud of her home, what she had built, what she had done, accomplished, her work, and she didn't want to leave. So she would not change her mind. And we tried.
Yeah.
But then the fall was starting to happen. And she would call them slip and slides. And either rolling up the bed or in the bathroom. That was one that would, so you're rushing over, you're getting those calls. Luckily, she did have a life alert system on her wrist, and that was, tapped into the home. Towards the end of her time at home, we put a lock box in the bathroom, and then in the front at the end, so that the EMTs could actually get there quicker from the fire department as we're, heading over. So those things,
Right. Little things people don't think about if they haven't been there, but that's a great little tidbit.
Yeah. So then she started using a walker, and she had her little gripper, which she loved. But if you ask me, I think depression set in for sure for her, with her existing heart condition when COVID hit, especially when COVID hit. It was a tough time for anybody in those kind of scenarios. And, she lived alone. We tried to protect her. We were dropping off. We were doing her laundry. Also, we took turns doing her laundry. Primarily, I started doing it towards the end the most. But, yeah, so I think that the anxiety of that, but I think the isolation, that really took a mental toll on her, for sure.
That's so tough.
Yeah.
So how do you come to the decision? Like you said, the fall started to happen, but she did not, want to leave her home. So how did you get to the point where it was time and you really had to make that decision for her.
Yeah, so eventually, unfortunately, she had one fall that resulted in a broken rib. And then she, shortly after that, had another fall that presented multiple back fractures. And so we found out she had tremendous osteoporosis, and we found out surgery was not going to be an option. She was in rehab again, and she was in excruciating pain. It was really hard to watch. And we did everything, though, to try to work on, different ideas, PT. After, my grandmother's fall, she was in a facility, so she was 91 when she fell. She had, broke her hip. She had surgery, but she never could walk again. Mentally, she was great, but she was in a care facility for 10 years. And I always felt just so hard. At the time that happened, my mom was still working. My grandmother's two children had moved to Florida to retire, and my mom's house just wasn't set up for wheelchair access. And so when this was all happening, I'm just reliving my grandmother's, experience. Like, how do we get her home? How do we get her home? So, tapping into like ACLFs and things like that. And around here, we don't really have a lot of facilities, to be honest with you, at the level of care that she needed. She ended up being a 2-assist or a Hoya lift to get out of bed. And there were very few in the area besides a predatory nursing home. So after a bit, I was like, we've explored all the options. We try to see what the PT can do. We even talked about like, how do we get her home, and we do it ourselves, but it just wasn't going to work out, unfortunately. And so we went with the approach of laying it all out to her. We got some suggestions from people like, well, your POA, you could go and that's still her house. So I said to my sister, I go, we need to sit her down. We need to explain everything that, has happened, how she's worked, how we've worked, and just say, what do you want us to do? And that's how we approached it with her. And, she paused for a second and she said, you're going to have to sell the house. And so I know that was probably the most heartbreaking thing for her after 50 years of living in that home. And so proud of it. But she was like, and now I'm going to have to transition from the rehab section here to the long-term care section. And yeah, she's dealing with that, but I'm glad she made, for us, the best was that she made that decision and she came to that. So
yeah, it sounds like that's a really tough conversation that you guys managed very well with her in letting her come to her conclusions about it versus, having to take the steps to force it. I mean, that's never fun. And I know some people have to do that as part of their journey. So very fortunate that your mom is strong and independent, but also, willing to understand, the choices on the table. So very fortunate for that. So now she's ready to move to the long-term care, and you and your sister are working on selling the house. So I know the journey gets a little bumpy at that point. So tell us what happened there.
So as that decision was being made, unfortunately, only my sister and I, she started to not feel well. And so we're trying to get the house prepared. Again, it's like one day my mom went to the hospital and just never came in. So it's like 50 years of belongings and items and memories, and you're going through that. And so she started getting ill. And so, trying to take care of that situation. And then, unfortunately, my sister's health escalated to being in an ICU for almost 6.5 months and being in the hospital for 8 and then passing away.
Oh my goodness. So all at the same time, and trying to take care of mom and get her transitioned and deal with the stuff, and I know we've talked on this podcast before about the thing of dealing with the stuff is honestly a surprise for a lot of people, just how difficult that is. And so to your support system, your sister, the one that you're going through this with, to have to all of a sudden not only go through that alone, but also, you want to be there for your sister, I'm sure, as she's going through her health journey and things, are a struggle on that side. I can't imagine, what that took just to get through all of that for you. And, I know you're still going through this journey, and I know this hasn't been terribly long ago, that all of this happened. But wow, so now you've got your mom, your sister, unfortunately, isn't with you anymore to help you. And now you're by yourself, And so, what's that transition been like? I mean, what have you learned through that? And how is that going?
Yeah, it's hard because expect just the way life has always been like a tag team type of approach. Luckily, I do have an aunt who is amazing, who has also just, my cousin passed away at 39 a year ago. So she kind of wanted to get busy. And she was like, distract me from my grief. I'm going to help you. And has been an amazing source for me. But she has her own life too, and she has a son down in Mississippi that she's going to go visit next month. So she's going to be gone for a month. So it's trying to really reevaluate where are your resources. How do you use those resources effectively? I've had some great friends also who have tapped in to help. But it's like you mentioned, I think this platform is wonderful, Holly, because you do feel alone, but you're not alone. Like just hearing the stories and replaying the podcasts that you've done so far, it just reassures you that you're like, okay, you're not alone in this journey, and there are resources and things like that. During the whole point of the house situation and moving her in, and I realized that I couldn't do it all by myself, so I ended up tapping into an elder care attorney he was an attorney that worked with us on some of our wills and POA and healthcare proxies a few years ago. And I called him up and I was like, I just need help. And can you do this? And fortunately, he was a lifeline as well during that process. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have that resource. And he had the background of also family members having to sell their homes, their loved ones' homes. So that was a big, and I still tap into him today on things that come up even. And it's just been helpful. But yeah, just trying to give yourself grace. I always tell people as well is a big thing, every day, deep breaths. It's definitely emotional. It's heartbreaking, but and your loved one is good. And my mom every day is like, oh, thank you so much. Just that, she took care of me. She did so much so much sacrifice for me that it's now my time to give back. And even though it's hard, the resources and navigation, they're there, and you just have to talk to friends and, just give yourself grace and give yourself a pause.
It is so true. It is so true. And very fortunate that you knew an elder law attorney, that could help. I think not everybody realizes what a resource that can be. And so I think that's tremendous advice to people facing your situation, that there is help out there. There are lots of resources and things, and it can take that burden, just a little bit of that burden off your plate. It doesn't mean your plate isn't still fully burdened.
Right. No. It's just, it was a huge help. And I also talk about just like the mental health aspect of all this too. I have a therapist, and
it's
God bless him.
You have to take care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of her and your family at home and, your life too? Because, I know you mentioned like your aunt and she has her own life, but so do you too. I know you like we talked about in the beginning, and when I was reading your bio, you've got a full-time job, and you're still navigating all of this. And, hey, a shout out to Reframe, your employer. I know you mentioned to me how flexible and wonderful they were with you. And, for any employers out there, us caregivers, as we're going through these journeys, that flexibility is tremendously important, but it also creates a ton of loyalty from your employees. We don't forget that. So I want to give them a nice shout out.
I can't thank them enough during this whole situation. I think it's just because of our mission too, and our passion to help people navigate this emotional and financial world that this all creates. So I really thank them wholeheartedly for, setting the stage of being an employer who really taps the talk for what they are trying to do for consumers and partners as well. So to their employees. So.
So since we're talking about that and your experience in the industry a bit, tell me, what changes do you see in the industry? Positive changes, negative changes, but what do you see that might help or impact families moving forward?
Yeah, no, I'm excited that there is continued and more awareness for LTC planning. I've been in the industry for 25 years. And there's still people who will be like, what do you do? But I think that's less. as the years progress and the support tools that I'm seeing that are coming out with products and services, particularly around the mental health piece and policies that offer support for not only the policyholder, but their extended family as well. I think that is so critical in those type of services. I'm also encouraged by the different products and programs coming to market that I think are more people, they're hearing from people and saying, okay, not one size fits all, right? And I think people, because there's more of a buzz again, and people are understanding the gravity of this all and going through life experiences, I think more people are open to now asking their brokers, financial advisor, family, their employers and associations, do you offer programs? How to get access to those? And the different products that are coming to market that meet different people's needs, that it doesn't, it's just covering not one, but multiple pronged solutions. I think is very encouraging and happy to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are so many more solutions out there than there used to be. And you said it right, that not one size fits all. I also agree so much that there is a lot of caregiver support wrapped around these policies, these products, which is huge because we have to support the caregivers. And even when, like your mom, being in a facility, people might think that's easier. It's not necessarily easier. There's still a tremendous amount you have to do. And I know you still talk to her, all the time and are still, managing that care all the time. And so, those resources for people in every situation are super critical. So as we kind of run up on our time here, just one last question for you. What is something that nobody tells you about this journey as you embark on it?
To expect the unexpected. Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. Like I said, give yourself grace. It's going to, it's hard, it's emotional, but it will be okay. And, like yesterday, before we talked, I mentioned I had to leave for a pure situation that was going on with my mom. Even though she's in that facility,
right?
It's 24/7, you can get a phone call at any time. But I just think it's also, I looked at her at one point, and I was like, this is also a time that I get to enjoy her. Even though there's a situation, there is some, there's joy on both sides of it, and so I hate that she's, in a place that she never expected to be at this age, but I value the time that I get to spend.
Yeah, but that time is definitely a blessing. And I've never talked to a single caregiver that regrets the time that they got to spend with their loved one and getting to care for them. I mean, everyone just cherishes that time that they had. So, and I certainly know that you do too. Well, Kristen, that is our time for today, just running out. But I thank you so much for sharing Rosemarie's story and the journey that you've been through. I know other caregivers are going to appreciate hearing from you because, like you said, it is a community. We are not alone. We all go through these journeys and it's hard. And it's so helpful just to hear that you're not alone and you're not the only one there. So I really so much appreciate you sharing that with us. And everyone listening, please be on the lookout for the next episode of the In Between Years coming your way next month. Have a great one.